Welcome to the Huntington and to our program, Why It Matters, a conversation with Charles Elachi. I'm Karen Lawrence, president of the Huntington, and it's great to almost see all of you here. About 6 months ago, I asked Charles Elachi to be my guest on our program, Why It Matters, and I was delighted that he agreed to do it. For this particular program in our series, the it in Why It Matters is the exploration of space. Why it matters and how it fuels both our knowledge and our imaginations. As the time for the event drew nearer, I kind of realized with chagrin that our date overlapped with the scheduled launch of the Jet Propulsion Labs, or JPL's, Europa Clipper, which was scheduled for tomorrow, October 10th. And I asked Charles if he needed to reschedule. I called and said, do we need to reschedule so you can go to Florida? And he said no, because he wasn't going. And when I asked why, this man of science said to me, because whenever I go, they postpone the launch. But he did add that the one time that didn't happen was when Valerie Elachi, his wife, accompanied him, and then the launch went off flawlessly. So I'm sure most of you have heard that the launch scheduled for tomorrow has been postponed. But it is because of Hurricane Milton and not Charles Elachi. So I'm very delighted, and we're very delighted, that Charles and Valerie are here tonight. And I'm also glad to say that Tom Rosenbaum, president of Caltech, who had planned to be at the launch until it was postponed, is also here in the audience, so welcome. But this program is particularly timely, not only because of that launch, because I thought that Charles Elachi, the esteemed former director of JPL and a Huntington Board of Governor, would be the perfect guest for this program this fall during the hugely ambitious Getty-sponsored art event, which is focused on the theme, Art and Science Collide. And I think, yeah, good. I think many of you know that over 70 institutions in Southern California are participating, including JPL and the Huntington. And I would be errant if I did urge you to go see our two exhibitions here at the Huntington, one in the Boone and one in the Chinese Garden, when you have time, if you haven't seen it already. Some of you may know that not only has Charles Elachi received a myriad of honors from the scientific community, the international community, including the French Légion d'honneur, but he's also the inaugural recipient of the Pasadena Arts Council Award for Arts and Science, which was given in 2012. And in accepting the award, he said, Pasadena has always been distinguished by a very strong intersection of science and art in our local but world-renowned institutions. I'm honored to play a role in this long-standing tradition. So tonight I'm looking forward to speaking with Charles Elachi about all of the above. And we hope that you, as members of the audience, also participate. We're passing out note cards, and we really ask that you fill them out with a question that comes up as you're listening to the discussion. We're fond of saying at the Huntington, we are cultivating curiosity. I think curiosity fuels all of our institutions represented in this audience, so don't hold back with your questions. I want to thank two important people who have helped me a lot with this program, Alice Tsai, Director of Special Projects and Institutional Planning, and Raylene Galarza, Senior Coordinator for Special Projects, both in the President's Office. I'm grateful to them. And folks will be collecting cards near the end of our conversation, and will pass them up to us with your questions. So now it's time. Would you help me welcome Charles Elachi?
I like your t-shirt.
As I said, we're delighted to have you here, and I'm going to turn over this part of the program.
Well, first let me say thank you for inviting me, and I thought what I'm going to start doing, and thank you all for coming. The gentleman here, he sat in the front row with a JPL t-shirt, you know. I thought what I'm going to start doing to kind of warm you up a little bit, I'm going to show you a little bit about what the place JPL, which is a division of Caltech, not too far from here, what are the amazing things that are happening there on your behalf, you know, basically exploring the universe on your behalf. And some of you probably are already wondering, what does Leonardo have to do? That's not Leonardo DiCaprio, that's Leonardo da Vinci. What does he have to do with Mars exploration? So you'll hear that story. And the reason I like always to include Leonardo, because he was a perfect example of somebody who crossed between science and technology and art. You know, he was an amazing person 500 years ago. So what I'm going to do to get you all warmed up, this is a mission, this is what we call the high bay at JPL. Now, some of you might know, but maybe not all of you, that literally for the last 20 years, we have had rovers on Mars exploring day in, day out, 24 hours a day, all being controlled, you know, from JPL. 20 years on another planet, when you think about it. And this is a picture of the latest rover. It is about the size of a large SUV. And the big challenge is, how do you land it on another planet? Because when we are coming in, we are coming at speed of 13,000 miles per hour as we arrive to the top of the atmosphere. To give you a perspective, that's like going from here to San Francisco in less than 2 minutes. And the energy, you know, in that capsule, you know, coming in, is basically the equivalent of 18,000 race cars going at full speed. And we have about 5 to 7 minutes to basically slow down and land softly on the surface. So we call it the 7 minutes of terror. Because literally it's terror, you know, because we have hundreds of events have to happen, you know, and they all have to happen correctly to land safely. If only one of them doesn't work, then we crash on surface. And you cannot joystick it because it takes about 5 to 10 minutes for the signal to come from Mars down to Earth. So by the time it arrives to the top of the atmosphere, when we receive the signal, it has already landed or crashed, hopefully landed, you know, on the surface. So I'm going to take you to the Mission Control Center at JPL, and I would suggest all of you to go and visit. I mean, there are public tours. It is an amazing place, because you stand there and you are seeing data coming from spacecraft on Mars, from Voyager, from Cassini, which is around Saturn, as you are standing there. And I used to call it the center of the universe, because it's really the center of the universe. So I'm going to take you to the day when we landed the latest rover, and you are going to see exactly what was happening. And we had cameras all over the lander, which will show you the background, what was all the different events which were happening on it. And I'm going to start it here.
And fly right maneuver, where the spacecraft will jettison the entry balance masses in preparation for parachute deploy.
Now, to land, we take the rover and we put the heat shield in front of it and a back shell which have a parachute. So now you are seeing
Navigation
pictures
has confirmed
coming from
that the
Mars,
parachute has
showing the
deployed, and we're
deployment
seeing
of the
significant
parachute.
deceleration
And what you are seeing in the background,
velocity.
this is
Our
real
current
Mars.
velocity
This
is
was not done in
100
Hollywood.
meters per
This is
second.
actually
About
actual
12
data, which
kilometers
was,
to the surface of Mars.
actual images. And then we drop the heat shield as we are slowing down.
Perseverance is now
And
slowed
that's
to
Mars in the
subsonic
background.
speeds, and the heat shield has been
So
separated.
whenever you will
This
be
allows
traveling to Mars
both the radar
sometime in
and
the
cameras
next
to get
20
their
years,
first look
that's
at
exactly
the
what you will
current
see.
velocity is
And that's bad. This is not
145 meters per
Mojave.
second, and an
This is
altitude of
actually
about
Mars,
10
in the
9.5
background.
kilometers above the surface.
Now you'll see it looks like it's wobbling. Well, we are down on a parachute, so as you are coming down, it's wobbling. But more important, we want to land in a very specific place. So as we are coming down, there is autonomous software which kind of moves the lander, so we end landing at the right location.
Lock on the ground. Current velocity is about 100 meters per second.
No, Chet, you can keep the
6.6
noise, the sound
kilometers of the surface
up.
of Mars. Perseverance is continuing to descend on the parachute. We are coming up on the initialization of terrain relative navigation and subsequently the priming of the landing engines. Our current velocity is about 90 meters per second at an altitude of 4.2 kilometers.
Now you could imagine the tension in the Mission Control Center because these people have worked on it for like 8 to 10 years. And everything depends on these 5 minutes.
Terrain relative navigation.
You know what's going to happen.
TBA is nominal.
We have priming of the landing engines.
And Mars has features very similar to Earth, like in desert areas. You see sand dune, you see craters. It has dry riverbeds. It looks very much like North Africa or the Mojave Desert. That's why we are interested in exploring it, to see if life could have evolved.
At an altitude of about a kilometer off the surface of Mars.
TRN Safety Bravo.
And then when we get to about 100 feet, we fire the engines to slow us down, and then we slowly sky crane the rover down to the surface. So it's like sky craning your SUV down to the surface.
We have started our constant velocity.
Now you see the jets of the rockets blowing up the sand. And as you look to the left at the bottom, you'll see it dangling, at the bottom, dangling the rover down to the surface.
About 20 meters
and the one
surface.
at the top is looking up from the one which was hovering. And once we touch the surface, we cut that cord, and we are on the surface.
Tango Delta.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the sands of past life.
Look at these young people, who have really worked. I mean, it's an amazing group of scientists and engineers. I call them explorers at JPL. Now, usually after we land, one of the first things we do, it's like when you get a new iPhone, you take a selfie and you send it to your mom and say, "Mom, look how good I look." So that's exactly what the rover does. It had an arm. At the end of it, there is a camera. And the arm was extended and took picture of it, so we can see that everything seems that have worked perfectly well. And this rover specifically has been driving around for 4 years, but we have another rover, we have 2 of them running now, which have been there for 10 years, and a couple other rovers which were there even before that time. Now, one big thing we did on this latest mission is we added a little helicopter. This is the first time ever a helicopter is flown, or any airplane is flown on another planet. This is the Wright brothers moment 100 years later. Now, you'd say, what's the big deal? I have a drone, I fly it all the time. The big deal is the pressure on Mars is 1% of the pressure on Earth. So that's the equivalent of flying a helicopter at about 100,000 feet. That's 3 times higher than where jet airplanes actually fly. Nobody has ever done that, before. So we had to develop all the electronics, the blades, the cameras, the all within about 1.5 kilograms, to be able to do it. And it did come back and landed. And the challenge for the landing, again, because of the delay in the signal, the helicopter has to figure out where it's going to land at a safe place, where there are no rocks so it doesn't tilt And we were expecting it to work like 5 times. It worked 75 times, on the surface. And then after it actually did tilt and break one blade, even that it's still working, but it's not flying. So this was an amazing accomplishment, which happened a couple of years ago. Now, why Leonardo? Before we landed Curiosity, not the latest one, but the previous one, actually before we launched it, I was in Milan at a conference. I get this email from a reporter who have regularly interviewed me at JPL saying, well, the director of the Royal Library of Turin would like to invite you to visit. And if you come here, you will be able to see Leonardo da Vinci Codex of Flight. I said, wow, that will be amazing if I can see it. So I said, okay, it's a 1-hour drive by train. So I went there. They take me to the vault, and there were guards with guns, for it, because that's where they have all the original of Leonardo da Vinci. They hand me these gloves, and they pull the Codex of Flight and say, you can go through it. And you could imagine, I was almost blown away. Because I'll be going through the pages that Leonardo actually drew things, on 500 years ago, or more than 500 years ago. And I was taken aback by the different pictures I saw. On the left is the helicopter we built at JPL. On the right is a Leonardo sketch of a helicopter. Look at this thing. On the right is our lander in the capsule. On the left is a sketch. Now, Leonardo was not drawing landers for Mars, but he was doing basically like tanks for attacking, fortresses. How do you protect the soldiers on them? And look at this one. This is, it looked like it was copied, from him. So
it wasn't, though, right?
well, maybe he was smarter than we thought. So anyway, after the director took me for lunch, and I said there must be something for them to let me actually do that. So he said, well, Charles, if we scan the Codex of Flight and put it on a chip, would you be willing to put it on the rover which is going to Mars? And that's actually what happened. So they sent us a little chip which has scanned all the Codex of Flight, and we put it on the rover, so now we can say that Leonardo Codex of Flight is on Mars and will be there for thousands of years. Now, you're going to upload more for the next. I was chatting with Karen, so Karen, maybe for the next lander, we ought to scan some of the documents at the Huntington, some of your most valuable, and put that ship on the lander on Mars, so we can say the Huntington has a branch, on another planet. I'm serious. We ought to explore that.
Okay,
talk with
I think you have a point.
Tom Rosenbaum and Lori Légion for the next lander. And this is one of my favorite pictures. People my age remember the footprint on the left, that Neil Armstrong footprint on the moon. That's something which inspired generations in the late 60s, about that we can actually go to the moon. The one on the right is the rover wheel footprint on the surface of Mars. So that kind of shows you the advances that we have done on your behalf, over the last 40, 50 years. Now, one story I always like to tell, because people always ask me when I give talks, how much did these rovers cost? And I'm an honest person. I want to tell the truth. So I came up with the idea. I tell them, well, it cost every American citizen one hamburger. And people look and say, wow, that's the kind of thing we want to spend our money on. Well, but you take one hamburger, $10, multiplied by 350 million people. It's 3.5 billion, which is the cost. But when you put of the rover, but when you put it in that perspective, then people will say, wow, this is really worth to spend our taxpayer, money on. Now, the next big leap that we are doing is to send a spacecraft to go to Europa. That's a satellite of Jupiter, which is made all of ice. We think there is an ocean below that ice. And what we want to do with this mission is take detailed images, sound through the ice, see how thick it is, So in the future, we can put a lander, drill our way through the ice, and put a submarine to see if there is any life in that ocean. I was going to tell you we're launching this tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, but the hurricane, came by, so that launch is delayed now until Sunday. Most of the team is at the Cape, but because of the wind and so on, we're not going to be launching it until Sunday. So now, it will take 6 years to get there, so it will get there in 2030. The solar system is pretty big. So Karen, make sure you invite me in 6 years to come and give another talk.
You're on.
And I'll show you the results.
We'll see what
that
happens. Yeah.
So
I've seen these clips a couple of times, and they're amazing, and it's hard to know where to start. But and I hope we do get to NASA's budget at some point, because it's actually declined instead of keeping up with what it should be. But let me not start there. The pictures of the rover and the expeditions to Mars really convey the incredible preparation, you said over a decade, for launch and landing, and the incredible riskiness of the landing. And we know that the Europa Clipper has been postponed for reasons of weather. I was living in Utah in 1986 when the Challenger tragedy occurred. And a Utah company investigation showed that the O-rings produced by a Utah company, Morton Thiokol, were responsible. And that some engineers had been warned about it. And I mentioned this in a very different context, but I read in the New York Times last month that Europa Clipper had some problems with transistors, that many transistors on the Clipper for many systems had some fatal flaws, and the scientists discovered that. So I'd like you to tell what happened, but I have two questions. How do you even think of quality control in a project of that magnitude over a decade, especially when you're not making all the parts? And then, maybe as important, how do you create a culture at JPL where if someone identifies a problem, which did happen with the Clipper, that the news is passed on to somebody who can do something about it before it's too late?
Well, let me put it in perspective. Every time you are doing exploration, it's a risky endeavor, because you are exploring something new. You are exploring something which has never been done. You are developing something which have never been done before. And that's even particularly risky in the space business. You just have to watch a launch. Effectively, you have a controlled explosion that you are doing that to launch that. My wife and I saw, the launch of the shuttle. It almost blows you away. We were fairly close to it. So anytime you do exploration, not only space illustrates it more, you are taking a risk. So a key challenge is, how do you mitigate that risk? How do you train the people to make sure we address and express every aspect of that risk? And we do a lot of design, a lot of testing. That's why I call the people at JPL Explorer, because they are some of the most brilliant people that we bring to work together as a team to develop this extremely complex, machinery. And every once in a while, we are aware that there might be failure. One of my favorite quotes, I'm modifying it a little bit, is from Teddy Roosevelt. He said, "It's far better to dare mighty things, even though checkered by failure, than to sit down in the twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat." We as human, we have been doing mighty things, not only in space. You do the same thing in music. You do the same thing in any exploration. And you do take a risk, otherwise you don't advance on doing that. The key thing is to really make sure you do your homework, and then if there is a failure, to learn from it, not to shy away from doing that. And that's the philosophy we have at JPL. I mean, I'll tell you a personal story. A couple of months before I became the director in 2001, we had a failure. We crashed a spacecraft on the surface of Mars. And when I became director, a senior staff at NASA headquarters said, "Who are you going to fire?" I told him, "I'm not going to fire anybody. These are the best people in the world. We encourage them to push the limit. They took a risk, and then, there was something that they missed. And matter of fact, I'm planning to appoint the head of the mission which crashed to be the project manager on Curiosity." And we learned from it. And basically, we got all the successes, that we had in here. Now, admittedly, when we have humans, like the shuttle you gave as an example, it's a little bit more, dramatic. But even then, when we started developing airplanes and there were test pilots, there were many accidents. And that's how we evolved to where we see today. You don't think twice about going to LA and getting on an airplane to do that. That's basically the legacy of a lot of people and lots of accidents, which happened in the past. Now, let me come back specifically to the question. Yes, it turned out that Europa, which is in orbit around Jupiter, is a very heavy radiation environment. As a matter of fact, as just for illustrative purpose, basically it's the same radiation if I take my iPhone, throw it inside a nuclear reactor, and the iPhone has still to work. So that's a challenge we were facing. And the people at JPL actually did very serious homework. They worked with companies about doing what we call radiation-hardened, electronic parts. They were put inside a shield, inside a cover on it. And then what happened 5 months ago, while we were already ready to go to the launch, some other company was testing some of these detectors, and they failed. They didn't sustain the radiation. So that, of course, you could imagine we were really concerned because we had hundreds of these transistors. So we went on a very strong effort to actually test the parts that we have, or the identical part to it. And fortunately, it turned out that the people did their homework before, and the part we have actually will sustain, the radiation. And you go on every mission, always there is some panic which happens 5-6 months before the mission occurs, because as I say, you are doing things for the first time, and setbacks do happen.
During your time at JPL, you launched and landed 3 rovers, right? Spirit, Curiosity.
Spirit, Opportunity, and Curiosity.
And Curiosity. And Curiosity is still active, I think launched in 2012. I think many of us wonder what we can learn, what your research there and the findings teach us about how we can be environmental stewards of our own planet.
Well, the key goal about exploring Mars, as I hinted about it earlier, we believe that Mars and Earth formed roughly at the same time, about 3+ billion years ago. And at the beginning, the environment were very similar. And that's why we see there are old rivers on Mars that they are dry now. But then over the billions of years of evolution, somehow Mars got colder faster than Earth. And the water either froze or the molecule were dissociated and the hydrogen evaded. So a key question, if it started like Earth, could have life evolved on it? And if it did, what kind of life? Is it based on DNA? Is it based on carbon? What kind of life evolved? And if it didn't, why not? Why did life evolve on this planet, but not on this other planet, which is very similar? It has volcanoes, it has dry rivers, it has sand dunes. So it's a fundamental question of understanding how did life start? And is our life a unique, in our solar system or in the universe in general? So that's our key focus. Now, in addition to that, we learned a lot about the environment on Mars, how the climate has changed over the billions of years. Equally interesting is Venus, which is another mission which is extremely hot because it has a lot of carbon dioxide. So if we don't watch how much carbon dioxide we put in the atmosphere, we might be becoming like Venus, where life is not sustainable on it. So by visiting these different planets, we actually learn about ourselves and explore about ourselves, how we have actually evolved.
Cautionary tale of Venus, right? In terms of environmental stewardship, though, what about what's elegantly called space junk?
Okay, that's number one. Let me tell you, space is very big.
Okay.
So you have to put a lot of junk, together. But it's becoming a concern, particularly in Earth's orbit. Because now there is a big trend of putting literally thousands of satellites, in orbit, basically to run your iPhone. So you can have communication, with the iPhone or to monitor the Earth. So a few years ago, there was an agreement worked through the United Nations, which says that every time we launch a satellite, at the end of its life, there should be enough fuel that we can bring it back and burn it in the Earth's atmosphere. So we don't add to all the what's considered junk on it. Now, not all the nations have signed up to it, but US, Europe, Japan, we all signed to it that actually we will be doing that.
Gives me comfort that's the case. I think probably all of us don't understand, coming back to Earth, the relationship between JPL, NASA, Caltech, Carnegie Science, and we'll throw in the Huntington at a later date. Can you just give us a primer of
No, that's an interesting
how they're
story
related?
That we have. In 1936, or around that time, there was a group of students working with a professor at Caltech by the name of von Karman. And they were mixing chemicals to see which one blows up more, so you can use them in rocket. Well, the campus was nervous, something like that, and a few explosions did happen. So they were told, why don't you go to the Arroyos? There was nothing there, and do your test. And we actually have a picture taken on Halloween Day, 1936, of these 4 students sitting down next to a few tanks of fuel, developing rockets. And that's how it got started. Sometimes it's amazing what 4 Caltech students can do. The professor was there just to supervise them a little bit, but it's the kids which did all the work. So anyway, it evolved during World War II. We built a lot of rockets. That's where the Jet Propulsion Lab name came from. So we developed the capability for launch vehicles. And then in 1957, Sputnik was launched. And again, the people who I remember it, I was a little kid listening to the sound on a radio. I remember that was a big panic in the US. And across the world, that here we have the Soviet Union is putting satellite above us. So within 3 months after that, JPL built and launched the first American satellite called Explorer 1. At that time, there was no NASA. If you look at the newspaper headlines, that Caltech satellite goes in orbit. We should frame that, put it in big signs at Caltech. Shortly after that, President Eisenhower decided to form a civilian space agency called NASA. So they formed it. They looked around the country to see who knows how to spell space. JPL was one of the places. And I'm told, I was not around at that time, I was not here, that then Caltech sold JPL to NASA for $1 with the arrangement that Caltech continues to manage JPL. So today, all the JPL employees are Caltech employees. The facility is owned by the government, by NASA. The funding comes from the government. But all the rules and operation and retirement and hiring and firing, we follow Caltech rules. So it is amazing when you think about it. A small private university actually is running the robotic space program of the country, or doing most of the mission. And now there are a few other people, being involved in it. But it's amazing what Caltech can accomplish.
Excuse me, is this the only university connected to NASA's?
No, this is the only center. Caltech, JPL is the only center which is run by a university.
Okay.
All the other NASA centers are civil servants. Now, DOE has similar arrangement with Los Alamos, Berkeley Lab, and a number of labs which are run by the UC system on doing that. But in space, JPL is the only NASA center which is run, by a private university.
And Carnegie Science?
No, sorry, I'm glad. Now, Carnegie is mostly heavily in the astronomy aspect. Mm-hmm. So there are connections, like when we do astronomy missions, we actually do work with Carnegie here, and Caltech does work also with Carnegie. So going back to a comment you made, when you think about it, this Pasadena, La Cañada, by the way, La Cañada claimed the title for JPL, Pasadena claimed the title for JPL, and they fight about who should be claiming JPL. It's amazing, within 5 miles, these amazing institutions, Caltech, Carnegie, Art Center, JPL, the Huntington, and so it's, the Norton Simon Museum. It's amazing how much intellectual capacity there is within 5 miles, of the little city that we call Pasadena.
And we're, the Huntington, are stewards of that history because we have along the Huntington ICW Institute, the history project on the aerospace industry. We have so many of the documents. And I think I was talking to Bill Deverell, more than 70 oral interviews.
No, I'm delighted that Huntington is keeping, because basically Southern California is the hub of the aerospace.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many other places, but really this is at the heart of it. Not only JPL, but you have Northrop Grumman, you have SpaceX, you have Aerospace Corporation. Not many people know that the shuttle was actually built in Los Angeles, or most of it. It was managed by the Johnson Space Center, but it was basically built, in the Los Angeles area. That's why we have one of the 4 shuttles is in Los Angeles, and there is none in Houston. So Texas was not happy, when NASA decided to do one of them here, in Los Angeles, because that's where it was mostly built.
I want to shift to humanities and the arts and its relationship to space. I understand that you created a program at JPL to recruit artists. And so I just have a general question about the relationship, the importance, the contributions. Da Vinci, the poets, you're quoting, words that come from poets and writers. How do you see the role of those artists?
I mean, no question artists play a major role in communicating to the public what we do, but also influencing us. Just to tell you a little story how it started at JPL. I think it was like 15 years ago or 14 when I was director, I invited Richard Koshalek. Some of you know him. He was the president of the Art Center. So I invited him to visit JPL, took him in a high bay, bunny suited him. And after we were done, he said, Charles, you need to have an artist here at JPL to explain to the public the exciting thing you do here. So I told him, okay, do you have a suggestion? He said, yeah, this guy who was coming with him, he's graduating shortly. His name is Dan Good. You should hire him. So I told Dan Good to come to see me the following day. And I told Dan, look what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 6 months. If you get the people at JPL excited about your art, about displaying things, then we'll hire you permanently. Now there is a group of 12 people at JPL of artists who spend full time, working there, displaying to the public, basically how we do the art, what are the kind of mission that we are doing. And I'll show you, not immediately now, but a little bit later, I'm going to show you some example of what they have done, including things which were done here, at the Huntington.
Can you show?
Yeah, well, let me go first. I'm going to go on the astronomy one, because that comes next.
Okay.
And that's something also not many people appreciate. You mentioned it, I think, in some of your comments, that, at Caltech, one of the founders of Caltech, his name is Hale. He was an astronomer. And he had a lot of connection with the Huntington. In fact, he was a good friend with Mr. Huntington, here. And he was a key driver behind convincing Mr. Huntington to make the Huntington estate basically become what became the Huntington.
I call it that he badgered Henry Huntington until Henry Huntington agreed to do
And
that. It was
Hale was
wonderful-
a key scientist or key astronomer at JPL, and a number of telescopes are named after him. So I told Karen, I'm going to show you some example of what I call the paintings of God. So these are pictures which were taken with the James Webb telescope. That's our latest telescope which was launched. It was done by the Goddard Space Center, but the camera was built here at JPL. And look at these pictures. Look at the beauty of the sky. I'm just going to go through them quickly. These are real pictures. I mean, you can take these and display them, in any museum as pieces of art. I call them the paintings of God that did that, which is at the intersection of science and art, because there is a lot of science behind them, but also they are artistically beautiful. So what I would recommend to you when you go home, don't do it now on your iPhone, go and Google best picture from James Webb telescope, and you get dozens and dozens of these pictures. I sit down and spend hours, watching them. And it amazes you what our universe is. This picture corresponds to an area about, if you take a dime at the end of your arm, that's about the area of the sky that is covered. And there are literally thousands of galaxies. Each one of them has billions of stars in it. So it's an amazing universe that is around us. That's what we call, the towers of creation. And this is not from the Hubble. This is from one of our missions. Is a picture of Jupiter. And the reason I like to show it, these are all hurricanes. And it's perfectly timely, with the problems of the hurricanes that we had here. So by watching Jupiter and the dynamics of the hurricanes, we can learn about hurricanes, here on Earth. But it's an amazing picture. So before I move, whenever you want me to move to the art, but I want to mention something for you which hopefully will intrigue you. Make sure starting next week, Monday or Tuesday, go out as the sun sets down and goes just below the horizon. You are going to see a comet, in the sky. Now, many of you have seen maybe many comets, but this one, the last time it visited Earth was 80,000 years ago. That was during the Neanderthal. I wonder what they thought about it. And it will be moving up in the sky over a period of 2 weeks. Now, if on the other hand you are an early riser, starting November 1st, there is another comet that you will see just before sunrise. So plan your thing, be in a dark place so you can see it with your eye. With a telescope, you can see it even better. I thought that's a little curiosity that could intrigue you.
I meant to mention also, in terms of artists, when you showed the landing and Perseverance, when that rover landed, where it landed is now called the Octavia E. Butler landing.
Yeah.
And I don't know who, NASA, that's the NASA official name for it, and I think many people in the audience know that Octavia Butler was an excellent writer, called science fiction writer, but speculative fiction, really fiction about what alternative forms of life might be, and was an amazing gender genre bending writer who unfortunately passed away early, I think in her 50s, and her archive is at the Huntington. But people connected to Butler let us know, this was a really terrific thing.
We are very good at naming things.
Yes.
Spirit, opportunity, curiosity, perseverance, ingenuity.
But
and
her
people,
name,
well-known people.
Yeah, and somebody who really had the imagination to think about what might be, which is inspired.
Well,
by
with
so
that
many
introduction,
Yeah.
as I told you about this group of artists, so I think about 10 years ago, again during my time at JPL, my wife and I were at Zion National Park. And we saw this poster, which kind of mimicked what posters were in the 50s. And Valerie, my wife, said, you have to do a poster for every planet. Well, of course, I picked the phone and called immediately Dan Goods, who was the head of the, and at that time I had the influence being the director. I told him, Dan, this is a picture of this poster. You have to have a poster for every planet that's being detected around other stars. So this is a set of posters which show what's the artist's imagination of what life would look like on another planet. So the one to the left, your left, is a picture of, or their imagination of people on a planet which is orbiting around two stars, or what we call double stars. So you actually will see two suns in the sky, and you see double shadows, on the ground.
So the line is where your shadow always has company. I don't know if you can see that. But.
The one in the middle is what they imagined the life will be on a planet which is not orbiting a sun. So it's dark all the time. So they thought that people would be partying all the time, on that planet. And the one to the right is a planet which is around, actual planet, which is around what we call a warm star. That means it's not as bright as the sun, so it emits most of its radiation in the infrared or in the red color. So most likely the grass looks red. So we can say the grass is red on the other side of the fence. So that's amazing. I mean, these people, and these were so popular that we ended doing a whole set for every planet on doing that. So you can Google them and you can get copies of these. So that's one example of how art is reflecting on the science and discoveries we are doing. Yeah, another one we're doing, the spacecraft, which is at the Cape now, that will be launching toward Jupiter and Europa. We decided to put a plaque on it, and it has a poem which is written by Ada Limon. She is she is the 24th poet, which was identified as one of the poets of the United States. And basically, the name of the poet is, let's see, I have it here, something which is In Praise of Mystery, a poem for Europa. And basically, she is a Latina, and she is the first Latina to become, the poet of the United States. So we actually put it on a plaque. The picture of the guy, that's a scientist who passed away a while ago. And the other side of the plaque, let me blow it up a little bit, we actually put the vibration of the sound of the word water in 70 languages, because we are searching for the ocean on Europa. So one of these is water, one of these is eau in French, one of them is aqua in, and the idea being is start transmitting our voices across the planet to another planet. And so you believe me that it's being put on, here's the engineers, before we shipped it out of JPL, they were actually putting on it. Some of you remember the golden disc that we put on Voyager. That's the equivalent of the golden disc that we have done before. Now, coming closer to the Huntington, some of you probably have seen this. So this is also a sculpture done by by the JPL artist, where you go inside of it, and every time a satellite flies by, you actually hear the sound. And that gives you a perspective of how many thousands of satellites are actually coming over the Huntington every day on doing. So it's another way of giving you how science and art can intersect, and how art can communicate to you all, what's being done.
And this was on our property.
Correct.
That
and it was here for like 7 years on doing.
Yeah.
Now this one is a cool one. I don't take credit for it because this is a very recent one. If you go to the Brand Library as part of the Getty intersection of art and science, these stalks are connected to little actuators on the surface. We get the signal from Mars about the wind, how strong is the wind on Mars, and actually make them vibrate based on the strength of the wind. So you are standing there and you are seeing the wind which is happening on Mars, how it's affecting, how it gets strong, it gets weak. So I would urge you to go and visit that display at the Brand after you visit the display at the Huntington. There is another
two exhibitions
here at the Huntington about global change in the late 1800s and 1900s as reflected by artists. And I'm going
to see
here you can see it. So this is literally what the wind on Mars is actually doing. Now, we don't have vegetation, but it's a way of displaying visually to all of you actually a scientific, measurement. And I'm going to end with this one. It is funny, but it is real. It has a story behind it. When I was on my first date with my wife, who was sitting in the back, she used to work in the animation industry. She used to produce animation movies. Well, to impress her, on the first date I took her to Caltech. We are nerds, On the second date I took her to JPL. And I took her to a lab where there was a young engineer, software engineer, basically developing software to visualize as we fly by a planet, how you see it as the planet rotate and the spacecraft rotate. So Valerie looked at me and said, he's going to put animation out of business. At that time, it was all done by hand. And here, this young engineer developing software to automate it and put it on computers. Well, he left JPL after a few years, and he didn't invent everything. But based on that fundamental work is now almost all the animation that you see. It was based on that fundamental work that was done at JPL. So this is an example of how research, which you cannot think about what is it going to be useful for, which build a whole new economy, and that's one example of it. And I think I will come back to our conversation.
We'll collect, if I can have some of the cards, I'll ask a couple more questions and take some questions from the audience, if you have those. So do you think in 25 years we will find signs of life? And what about intelligent life?
Well, let me put it this way. Being a scientist, I need to have proof for things. I have no doubt that there is life in the universe. I can bet you on that. But we still haven't discovered it. I actually have proof that we are. And the reason I believe there is life is the laws of physics and chemistry are the same across the whole universe. I showed you that picture earlier, that literally there are billions and billions of stars. And we're finding that almost every one of them has planet around it. We have discovered now like 7,000, planets, some of them somewhat similar to Earth from temperature, atmosphere, and so on. So it's hard for me to believe that life only evolved here. And I'm a religious person, even when I think God created life on this planet, I would say, why didn't he create it everywhere? God is almighty. He could have created life everywhere. So there is no doubt. Now, is it intelligent? Do we communicate with it? That still remains to be seen, or if it has evolved to do that. Sometimes I tell people when I used to travel to Washington, go to Congress, I'm searching for life, intelligent life.
I think Lily Tomlin had a Broadway show with a title like that. Okay, how did galactic behemoths like Elon Musk, who can control so much, fit in the picture of optimism or not for future space exploration?
Now, that's a very good question, and I get that question all the time in one form or another. And basically, the role of places like JPL and NASA is to develop new technology, new capabilities, the same like Caltech and other universities, and then turn it over to the private sector who are entrepreneurs to actually make an economy out of it. So I usually say, if Elon is listening, he will get mad at me. Elon Musk didn't invent a damn thing, but he's a great entrepreneur. He took the technologies that NASA has developed and made it much more efficient, and we are delighted that they are doing that because he created competition. Now the price of launching drops down significantly. So I have a lot of admiration for him as a technical guy. It's different when he gets involved in politics. But as a technical guy, I have a lot of admiration and a visionary guy. But we are delighted that people are picking the kind of technologies that NASA has been doing and actually making it available, for the public and making an economy out of it.
I mentioned before about NASA's budget. So percentage-wise, it's declined, and again, an article recently talked about that declining budget, and that there's a real problem with that. And I think it said we have a 20th century infrastructure for a 21st century program. Is that true? Is there anything to do about it? And how do you see private industry?
Yeah, no, that's very good. In fact, Karen asked me earlier, if you were in charge of the country, what do you do? I told her the first thing I'll do, I'll double NASA budget, as well as NSF, and because we must have some JPL people here.
Yeah.
No, because when you think about it, the investment that our country has been doing in advancing science, technology, and knowledge is what led to our economic wealth that we have it here. None of you will go around without your iPhone. None of you would buy an iPhone which doesn't have a camera. The focal plane in that camera was developed at JPL for our telescope. We didn't do it because it's going to benefit cameras, but we did it to advance the technology. The internet, that was being developed for purely scientific and then military reasons. Now you cannot live without it. So I think any investment that we make in gaining knowledge, advancing knowledge, and advancing technology will have tremendous payoff. That's one big strength of our country. Here we invest more in science and technology than any other country, and I travel a lot around the world. Now, other countries are trying to catch up with us by increasing their investment in science and technology. And like I told you earlier, building these rovers, it's the equivalent of a hamburger per US citizen. That's what it costs. It's peanuts, literally.
So what future JPL exploration are you most excited about?
That I'm most excited about?
Yeah.
Well, I get a lot of these questions. Number one, I'm excited about anything JPL does, because anything we do gain you new knowledge and allow you to discover new things, be it looking at Earth, monitoring the Earth's climate and what's happening, with global warming, looking at other planets. So I would say the most exciting, a couple of things I would say the most exciting. One is when we start seeing planets around other stars which look exactly like our planet and which have that environment. Because that will put a different perspective that life, probably it's more real than we think about it. The other one is monitoring our planet and our pulse. Again, when you go home, Google Eyes on Earth. That's a software that JPL developed, a visual software, that will allow you to see literally what was happening today. How much carbon dioxide is being emitted, what's the temperature, anything which is affecting our planet, our environment, you can have it on your iPhone. And that will allow you basically to make intelligent decisions, about it. Now, the most dramatic one is Mars landing, I have to admit that. Because it's really a dramatic moment when you are actually landing a rover on another planet.
And you said a rover was a real leap from the other kinds of vehicles that had been created, right? I mean, creating a rover was the next big thing in terms of the lander and the orbiter, I think you said.
Yeah, we had a lot of advanced technology which had to go with it. In actuality, you remind me of one thing to give you the spirit of JPL, what we'll do. As I mentioned, we crashed a lander in the late 90s. So after we wanted to sit down and see, okay, how do we get ourselves out of that depressive mood? And that's when I became director. So we went to NASA with 3 ideas. We said, well, we can build an orbiter, which we are sure we know how to do. We can build another lander. We're pretty confident we learned from the one we crashed what we do. Or we can take a leap forward and actually build a rover, which is an order of magnitude more complex. Guess which one we selected? We went for the rover. And the lessons for that when you have a setback, don't shy away from taking a leap forward. That because you will learn a hell lot more than trying to copy something which you have done before.
How did your education take place? Who are your major influences? How did your education take place? And who are your major influences?
How did my personal education, I guess, take place? Well, I'm a graduate of Caltech, so that's one thing. But before Caltech, to give credit, I went to France. I was at University of Grenoble in France, and before that, I was in Lebanon, and I was fortunate to have parents who really emphasized education for us, and I had teachers who were absolutely great. So that's kind of my educational background. But the other thing is to emphasize almost in everything you do, like when I was the director at JPL, that we should push the limit. And if there are setbacks, these are opportunity to learn. These are not opportunity to lay off somebody or to fire somebody. And I used to have a saying to tell the teams which worked on this rover, if the mission succeeds, you are going to be on the podium. If the mission fails, I'm going to be on the podium. Because, they have to see that the people in the leadership actually will support them to push the limit. And they are not going to go and hide behind a door, somewhere. And that has served us tremendously well at a place like JPL.
Do you have any advice for someone whose dream is to work at NASA or JPL, either in the arts or as an astronaut or engineer?
Well, I would say pursue your dreams, because anything is possible. Look, we didn't go on my background. I grew up in a little village in Lebanon. I had no idea I'm going to become the director of JPL. I would have never dreamt even about it. But, I didn't come here because of JPL. I came here because I wanted to get an education. Fortunately, Caltech gave me a fellowship, and I found out that the JPL is connected with Caltech. So the point is, pursue your dream. Almost anything is possible. But the most important thing, make sure you dream about things you enjoy. Don't push your kids, to do something that you like. You want them to push something they are passionate about. And my two daughters, none of them ended in space activity. Yeah, one ended in political science, and the other one ended in architecture, landscape art. But they love what they are doing. And I'm delighted that they are doing that. So pursue your passion, no matter what it is. Keep pursuing it. You will get some setback. I got some setback in my career, but you pursue your passion, and I think you can achieve what you want to achieve. And I'm delighted that some people interested in becoming astronauts, they might be the next people who go to Mars or work at JPL. Doing a little advertising for JPL. Usually in the summer, we do have a program for students at JPL, and there is like 600 or 700 students, the same way at Caltech, it's called the SURF program. So I encourage people to look at that, go on the website, look at it, and spend a summer working with some of the leading researchers and leading engineers.
Okay, little shift of gears. What film or TV show most accurately represents space?
I'm going to tell you something that is going to surprise you. I'm not a science fiction fan. That surprised a lot of people, about this thing. But I would say my two favorite programs, clearly Star Trek is a lot of fun, to watch that. So I love, not because of, that we are going to do what they're, but the imagination that the movie producers and the artists and it's amazing how they imagined. And then they were able to actually show it. And the movie is The Martian. And the reason I like The Martian for two reasons is, number one, it's almost real.
Wow.
Even that it's a little science fiction dramatized, by Hollywood, but almost everything you see on it could be done in the next decade or 2 decades. Plus the other one, Jessica Chastain came and visited JPL, and I'm a big fan of her. So we spent some time. Oh, and there is a third thing, is one of the things which saved them was the little lander that we had from JPL. If you remember that for the communication. And before the movie was released publicly, they offered to show it to a group of JPLers who we rented a movie theater, and we showed them. And every time the word JPL came up, guess what? Everybody was jumping and cheering. So these are my two favorites.
That's good. I was reading about a movie. I don't know if anybody saw Jodie Foster in Contact in the 90s, right? But and she was a radio engineer, I think, and she got to be able to actually encounter life, to experience space-time mysteries.
Yeah.
And but the line that I really liked in the movie was, "They should have sent a poet." And recently I was reading an article entitled "NASA Needs Philosophers." So just the kind of, again, back to the poetry of space and an ability to capture mystery and words. You said you don't like science fiction that much.
I mean, these things, that's the intersection of science and art, like what you said. One thing maybe some of you know it, when we had, I think, Curiosity, we had to wake it every morning, to start operating. So we used to send a piece of music, on our communication link to wake it up. So it's like you wake up with music on your phone. So these things really work together. I think that.
Okay, you're. I think I know.
Are we spending all night here?
No, we've got a few more minutes. How do you manage public faith in science, especially given the huge instances of fraud identified in peer-reviewed journals? A large increase over the decades, both as a percentage and, of course, in absolute terms.
Yeah, I think the question is how do you manage public faith in science? Also, that's a very good question, particularly now with all this chat, GPT, AI, and so on. I mean, it's very important to have checks and balances and communicate to the public how actually we do. I mean, as scientists, we don't publish unless it's peer-reviewed. If I write something and I came with an invention, I want you to review it, make sure that you can repeat that invention or whatever was done. And that's our way as scientists to assure the public that what we are doing is correct, on it. And it's really, and what worries me a little bit, or maybe a lot, about the AI and the chat GPT is it relies heavily on everything which is on the internet. And I don't need to tell you, there is a lot of BS on the internet, to do that. So people are starting to think now of how do we make sure that when we use ChatGPT, it only access information which have been verified, not any information that somebody put on it. So it is a challenge. I mean, whoever wrote this thing, it is a good point, that we really need to communicate to the public of the processes that to follow to make sure the information and the discoveries are correct. Sorry about that.
Okay, this is not a question, but I'm going to read the poem that traveled 1.5 billion, is going to travel 1.5 billion miles, right? In praise of mystery.
Hopefully it will be launched on Sunday.
Right, we're still planning for it to be launched on Sunday. And then we'll call it an evening, and thank you so much for this. But let me end with the words of the poet laureate, in praise of mystery, a poem for Europa. Arching under the night sky, inky with black expansiveness, we point to the planets we know. We pin quick wishes on stars. From Earth, we read the sky as if it is an unerring book, of the universe, expert and evident. Still, there are mysteries below our sky, the whale's song, the songbird singing its call in the bough of a wind-shaken tree. We are creatures of constant awe, curious at beauty, at leaf and blossom, at grief and pleasure, sun and shadow. And it is not darkness that unites us, not the cold distance of space, but the offering of water, each drop of rain, each rivulet, each pulse, each vein. O second moon, we too are made of water, of vast and beckoning seas. We too are made of wonders, of great and ordinary loves, of small invisible worlds, of a need to call out through the dark. Thank you, Charles, for all of this. It's been
I didn't write it. Thank you. It's a beautiful poem.
Yeah. And thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure to have you here and great questions that you asked.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.